Oh no, what happened? What happened? Legal definition of women is based on biological sex, UK Supreme Court rules. Now, I know a guy. He's on the American Supreme Court, but his influence is far and wide. It reaches very, very far, just like his penis. Judges say Equality Act definition excludes transgender women after gender critical campaigners challenge. The UK Supreme Court has issued a historic and definitive ruling that the terms women and sex in the Equality Act refer only to a biological woman and to biological sex. In a decision that delighted gender critical activists, 5 judges ruled unanimously. By the way, I specifically sought out The Guardian because I knew they'd be moulding the hardest about this. 5 judges ruled unanimously that the legal definition of a woman in the Equality Act 2010 did not include transgender women who hold gender recognition certificates, GRCs. Now, this is where it's going to be like, oh my god, we don't have rights. You do have rights. You have the exact same amount of rights as everybody else. The same as I'm not allowed to just walk up to you in the street and hit you and rob you or kidnap you or murder you or do any of those things. I don't have that, so you have the same rights as everybody else. What you want is access to women only spaces, right? And a lot of the women in those spaces had a problem with that. They had a problem with you entering their changing rooms, their toilets, their swimming pools, like any other groups that they were a part of, women's shelters and everything as well. Like they had an issue with that, right? And the government basically for ages told them, no, 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 you shut up, you little bigots, and everything. And that's what happened for ages, right? So basically, people get fed up, and trans people are very well known for trying to use state violence to silence their critics as well as other intimidation tactics. They went after these people and branded them as TERFs and got them fired from their jobs and did hundreds and hundreds of stuff to them. So now, I mean, it's not nice when the state gets used against you, is it? It's almost like the state's a problem. But anyway, the judgment could have far reaching ramifications and lead to greater restrictions on the access for trans women to services and spaces reserved for women. It prompted calls for the UK's laws on gender recognition to be rewritten. The UK government said the ruling brought clarity and confidence for women and those who run hospitals, sports clubs, and women's refuges. Because, especially in women's refuges, like, I don't know if you know many of the reasons about why they're in there, but they kind of don't want to be around men. Oh, but that's a woman. That's a woman. Oh, to you, maybe, but other people don't have to partake in your delusion, right? You can like everybody knows my opinion on it. Identify as whatever you want, chop whatever parts off of you that you want, dress whatever way you want, hey ho, whatever. That's absolutely fine. You can do that. That is your right to freedom of expression. You absolutely can do that. However, other people don't have to take part in your expression. That's the middle ground. That's the middle ground so that society can peacefully coexist with each other. You can do your thing, and people are allowed to say stuff about you doing your thing, but they're not allowed to prevent you from doing your thing. Right, there we are. There's a happy middle ground where everyone's happy, except you're fucking not, because you never are you? A spokesperson said, we have always supported the protection of single sex spaces based on biological sex. Single sex spaces are protected in law and will always be protected by this government, unless it's a men only club. Those aren't allowed. But anyway, the case was brought to the Supreme Court by the gender critical campaign group for Women Scotland. I was actually hanging out. A bunch of them were actually at my show, which is backed financially by J.K. Rowling after 2 Scottish courts rejected its arguments that the Equalities Act definition of a woman was limited to people born biologically female. Lord Hodge, the Deputy President of the Court, said the Equality Act was very clear that its provisions dealt with biological sex at birth and not with a person's acquired gender, regardless of whether they held a gender recognition certificate. That affected policymaking on gender in sports and the armed services, hospitals, as well as women only charities, and access to changing rooms and women only spaces, he said. However, trans women still have equal rights, equal pay rights as women, and could have the right to be treated as women in some situations. In its 88-page judgment, the court says that while the word biological did not appear in the definition of man or woman in the Equality Act, the ordinary meaning of those plain and unambiguous words corresponds with the biological characteristics that make an individual a man or a woman. If sex did not only mean biological sex in the 2010 legislation, providers of single sex spaces, including changing rooms, homeless hostels, and medical services, would face practical difficulties, it said. The justices added, read fairly and in context. so the Supreme Court can read things in context. The provisions relating to single-sex services can only be interpreted by reference to biological sex. The ruling represents a significant defeat for the Scottish Government. For Women Scotland had initially challenged legislation that allowed trans women with a GRC to sit on public boards and posts reserved for women. Scotland's First Minister John Swinney said his government accepted the court's judgment. He said, he said it clarified the limits of the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which introduced gender recognition certificates for trans people. We will now engage on the implications of the ruling, he said. Protecting the rights of all will underpin our actions. They still have rights. You don't have a right to be wherever you want all the time. That's not a right. You don't have the right to occupy a space unless you own that space, right? Whoever owns the space decides whether or not you come in. They decide whether or not you can come into that space. That's the way it works. That's just the way it works. Sorry, private property, hoorah. The Scottish Government defended its actions in the case, which it said were always guided by the Equality and Human Rights Commission's advice. It said it would now engage with UK ministers and with the EHRC to look into the ruling's implications, since the legislation involved was passed by Westminster. Trans rights campaigners urged trans people and their supporters to remain calm about the decision. The campaign group Scottish Trans said, "We are really shocked by today's Supreme Court decision, which reverses 20 years of understanding of how the law recognises trans men and women with gender recognition certificates." Why do you need validation from the government? It's the government. They're scumbags. They're scumbags. Why do you need validation from them? Also, why do you need to be in certain spaces? I don't understand why you need to be in certain spaces. Right? Whereas, oh no, I must get changed here. I must pee here and everything. I don't understand it. If gender's this wishy-washy thing, then that doesn't really matter in many cases, apparently. Then who cares if you're using the men or the women's toilets? If everyone's fine with using the men's, then use the men's. Right? I don't understand why everything's a problem. That's why I believe all of you are women, because you're always fucking moaning. We will continue working for a world in which trans people can get on with their lives with privacy, dignity, and safety. That is something we all deserve. That is something that you are already guaranteed under rights. Safety, like I said before, if I walk up to one of you and like punch you or kill you, I'm going to jail because I violated your rights. Right? Dignity, I'm not sure what I could do to violate your dignity, but I'm certain I can come up with something. Right, but basically you still have the exact same rights as everybody else. The only thing that's been taken away from you is you don't have the right to be in certain spaces. Now, these spaces can still decide at the end of the day, yeah, sure, fuck it, come on in. They can still let you in. It's up to them. But basically, their hands were forced before where they weren't allowed to deny service. Now, I think a business should be able to deny service to anyone for whatever reason. Even if loads of, well, in fact, there are places that are doing it already in Britain and they just get overlooked. But even if a place had a no whites sign outside, that's their business, it's their rules. No shirt, no shoes, no service. No dad, no service. But that's fine, it's up to the business. So these places can still decide to let you in. Right? It's just now their decision, which is the way it should be. If someone owns a piece of property, then it's up to them completely. Whatever happens on that property is completely up to them. Right? See, which is why whenever I get asked to leave somewhere, which does happen now and again because of who I am, right? It happened a few times at pubs in Edinburgh. It was funny that. It was actually really funny. The guy didn't realise that half the pub was with me and half the pub got out and left with me. And you should have saw the look in his face. That was quite funny. That man lost out in thousands that night. But anyway, I leave immediately. I just leave immediately because I'm like, your property, your rules, I'm gone. Bye-bye. And I don't make a thing of it. I could have posted that bar on like Twitter or whatever and put them on blast, but I didn't. Right, because I just didn't make a thing of it. Because I respect the fact that if someone owns property, to be fair, he was just a manager. He probably didn't own the pub, but he had authority in that situation. If they tell me to leave, I'll leave immediately. Because it's up to the person that owns the property. I recognise that. There's certain places I'm not allowed into. Apparently, I'm banned from Geek Retreat because there's some psycho in there that absolutely hates me. Not that I would ever go into Geek Retreat because it fucking sucks. Right? Who gives a shit about Geek Retreat? There's always an aroma. Uh, Sasha Deshmuk, the chief executive of the human rights group Amnesty International UK, which joined with the Scottish Government in the Supreme Court case, said the decision was clearly disappointing. Also, about I've never even been. I went in there once to buy a booster box like 3 years ago. I've never been in since, but apparently I'm banned from a place I had no intention of ever going to again. It's funny. There's a whole thing happening with that. Don't worry about it. You'll find out later. There are potentially concerning consequences for trans people, but it is important to stress that the court has been clear that trans people are protected under the Equality Act against discrimination and harassment, he said. The ruling does not change the protection trans people are afforded under the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, as well as other provisions under the Equality Act. So, there you go. It's fine. Nothing to complain about there, but you'll find something, won't you? Susan Smith, co-founder of For Women Scotland, said the legal action had been a really, really long road. Today, the judges have said what we always believed to be the case, that women are protected by their biological sex, she said. Basically, For Women, they're a group. They were actually at the comedy show that we did at the start of the month. There was a good chunk of them there. I think my... I think my girlfriend's going to join. They all got along really well. My girlfriend got their card, and she was like, "I really like them," and everyone. So, yeah, I think she's going to end up becoming a member. My girlfriend might be a feminist, but she's one of the cool ones. Sex is real, and women can now feel safe that services and spaces designated for women are for women, and we are enormously grateful to the Supreme Court for this ruling. In a social media post, J.K. Rowling said, "It took 3 extraordinary, tenacious Scottish women with an army behind them to get this case heard by the Supreme Court," adding, "I'm so proud to know you." Hodge, the deputy president of the court, said it believed the position taken by the Scottish Government and the EHRC that people with gender recognition certificates did qualify as women, while those without did not, created 2 subgroups. This would confuse any organisation they were involved with. A public body could not know whether a trans woman did or did not have that certificate because the information was private and confidential. Then ask them to present it. Well, that's the point of a certificate. It's a bit of paper proving something. You present the certificate then, you ask them for it. It's like, for example, like my driver's license, what am I going to say if somewhere goes, "Oh, we just need some photo ID before you can open this bank account"? What am I going to, I'm sorry, that's private and confidential. You can't have that. Well, then I don't get my bank account then, do I? Which is why you get handed these documentation so that you can hand them over to people. And allowing trans women the same legal status as biological women could also affect spaces and services designed specifically for lesbians. There's a lot of places like that. In women's shelters, there's a lot of lesbians. Anyway, who had also suffered historical discrimination and abuse. Kishore Faulkner, the chair of the EHRC, said it was pleased the ruling had dealt with its concerns about the lack of clarity around single-sex and lesbian-only spaces, but would need time to fully understand its implications. "We are pleased that this judgment addresses several of the difficulties we highlighted in our submission to the court, including the challenges faced by those seeking to maintain single-sex spaces and the rights of same-sex attracted persons to form associations." Right. So basically, this hasn't really changed much. It just lets property owners decide what they are going to do, which is the way it should always be. Now, if you have an issue with this, basically, or if you're a trans person, you're like, "Oh, we don't have spaces, we don't have this, we don't have that," apply to the government for a grant. They'll shove money up your arse, right? They're throwing tons and tons of money at this. Sadly, not USAID anymore because all of that gets shut down. We'll never know how fast those shrimps could run. But in regards to if you want to open a trans only like shelter or trans only cafe or any of these other things, just go talk to the government. They'll shove grants up your arse. They will. They will. You'll get money for that. So basically, instead of going the standard leftist thing of, "Oh, I have this problem, I'm going to do nothing about it," that's for other people to solve. That's for the billionaires and the taxpayers to solve, right? So instead of doing that, get off your arse, go apply for a government grant, and if you're annoyed about this, go start your own thing. Just go build your own Twitter.